My name is Maurizio Abdi. We're at Brezza Ristorante here in Bridgeland, Calgary, Alberta. Brezza was founded in 1987. It's been here for almost 40 years now. The way this restaurant started was through my father, the founder, Marco Abdi. My father, Marco, hailed from Somalia, so that's where he originally comes from. He left Somalia to Libya, and through Libya he was a truck driver in the Middle East, doing anything he could just to survive, and eventually made his way to Rome. So as a young teenager, he was in Rome and lived there for 12 years, and while in Rome, he fell in love with the culture, the people, the food, and he actually was in the restaurant industry over there and worked odd jobs to survive, and eventually he made his way to Canada. At the time was a gold mine for him, and he said that he wanted to go over there. So in '79, my uncle sponsored him, who actually came before him and was in Montreal in '71. He was the first Somali to come over here at the time, and when they saw his passport, they didn't even know where Somalia was. And he lived in Calgary, and when he arrived here, he arrived in this block of First Avenue, and with his luggage and around $200 in his pocket. He was looking for a new life and a new start for him, and he always had a dream. So he went down the street, and to the left of us we have his first job, which was the Bridgeland Professional Center. That was the building where my dad met John Carcazzola, the Italian man who owned the building, and he offered my dad a sandwich. My dad kindly refused, and then he gave him the sandwich, and my dad finished it in 2 bites. He offered my dad a job as the caretaker slash maintenance worker in that building, which also led him to letting my dad stay in this house, which at the time was a permanent residence to 2 people upstairs, and my dad lived in the basement. For 5-6 years, he was living in the basement while working odd jobs. While telling people for 5-6 years, he said he wanted to open an Italian restaurant. So at the time when trying to open the restaurant, he couldn't get the permit because obviously getting a credit application with his background and everything was a bit difficult for the bank to approve of that. But through the help of some connections, he finally got that and he opened it up. And what was funny was a lady who came into the restaurant a couple weeks ago told me a story about when she was a nurse across the street at the Bridgedale building, and she worked at the General Hospital as well. When my father came in with the credit application that he was approved and that he was opening an Italian restaurant across the street, 5-6 of them in the room, really gleeful and happy for him. But unfortunately, when he left the room, they all spoke amongst themselves that the last thing Bridgeland needed in an Italian predominant neighborhood at the time was another Italian restaurant. There was a lot of odds against him at the time. I think he was one of the first, if not the first, Black-owned business in Calgary that was a restaurant, and at that time doing an Italian restaurant in an all-Italian neighborhood, everybody kind of gave him 3 months. They said that he's not going to last in this economy and with all these Italian restaurants around, and he kind of used to tell me as a kid that you can't really appreciate heaven without going through hell, and he said nothing was impossible. So he finally got the restaurant opened as a deli/restaurant, and that's what led to Brezza. All I remember is he sometimes would bring me into the restaurant on a busy Friday or Saturday night, and there'd be so many people, and I was just a kid, so I didn't really understand at the time what was happening, but he would bring me to tables and say, this one's made in Canada, and point to me and get a couple laughs at the table. Everywhere we'd go, he'd always be waving to people, and he was really personable. And I didn't really understand it at the time because I didn't really think about it much, but even going to school and stuff like that with him, he'd always be in the car telling me stories about his dad in Africa and about how he grew up. And when he'd pick me up at school, he'd run outside in his suit and take the ball in front of the 20 kids and boot it up in the air, and all my friends would go crazy, and I was so embarrassed at the time because I was like, what is this guy doing in this Steve Harvey suit? But I loved him, and being around him and my nonna, which is my grandmother, she was always in the kitchen making bruschetta or focaccia, fresh bread, and I could always smell that, and she'd cut up half a slice of bruschetta and half a slice of focaccia and make a big sandwich for me, and that was my childhood, and this is where I grew up, and I loved it. This place was like the celebrity hangout of the 80s and 90s for Calgary. People would fly into Calgary and they'd stop at Brezza, or they'd do a show and then they'd come to Brezza after the show. Faces and names like Diana Ross, Rod Stewart, DiCaprio, some of the biggest stars would come through. It was the house of the Flames for the last 30 years as well. Before they'd go play the Flames, they'd come and eat downstairs, and there would be like people upstairs trying to catch a glimpse of like Doug Gilmour and Joe Nieuwendyk and all these big time Flames players. So I didn't really understand the circumference of it till recently, but this place was really well connected because my dad's biggest business acumen probably was his marketing. So he was really big with, you know, check it out, or he'd always say, check it out, come down to La Brezza for authentic Italian, and they loved it because of the experience that the restaurant had. And it was just, like I said, organic at the time in the 80s where people were coming in and, you know, it was like a place to be. It was the culture that he created here. Marco, my father, passed away in 2015 suddenly due to cancer. So for me, it was like, as a kid, my mom taking a week to decide whether she was gonna sell this brand or continue this and carry his legacy through was huge. And she ended up keeping the restaurant alive because of all the patrons and people in Calgary who said this restaurant can't close. Just a little bit about him. He won Citizen of the Year in '94 as well. And he donated over $1 million towards the Children's Hospital. He was a big philanthropist. He brought over 18 of my family from Somalia to Calgary in '96, and that was national news as well. My father, with the help of the Calgary Flames Foundation, went down to Kenya, and my mom and my dad brought over my whole family from Somalia. So they're all here today, and I'm really grateful for that. And for me, I feel like to pay homage to that is a big responsibility and a big going that I want to do and I want to carry on for the rest of my life. As of like this last year, I've been really thinking about my life and what I want to see if I were to go tomorrow. And I think it's passion versus purpose. My father really instilled the idea of being honest, integrity, and just being yourself and true to that. So that's just what I'm going to do and how I'm going to carry myself forward. And I feel it in my heart that, you know, I'm connected to La Brezza in a way that I can't really describe. It's been a part of me, it's been a part of my family, and I'm excited towards what the future holds. But yeah, that's all I can really say about that.